Indiana police say a Valentine's Day celebration turned into a brutal murder scene when a husband, furious that his wife didn't appreciate his romantic plans, allegedly stabbed her 40 times. Taylor Meyer is accused of beating his wife with a wine bottle and repeatedly stabbing her while the couple's 3 young children were asleep in their home. And after the alleged attack, he's accused of then sending a photo of her dead body to her alleged lover with the caption, "Your fault." Stay tuned as I walk you through what happened. For Law and Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker. It was Valentine's Day 2025. Taylor and Deborah Meyer, a married couple in Jeffersonville, Indiana, were supposed to be celebrating love. But by the end of the night, Deborah was dead. Court documents obtained by WAVE revealed Taylor had planned an elaborate Paris-themed evening, buying Deborah a dress, ordering dinner, and having their children draw pictures of the Eiffel Tower. But police say when she didn't seem impressed, Taylor allegedly snapped. According to a probable cause affidavit, officers with the Jeffersonville Police Department responded to the couple's home late on February 14th after receiving a call from someone claiming Deborah was in danger. The caller allegedly said he'd received a distressing call from Deborah's phone and could hear her yelling for help. When police arrived, they knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The man who called 911 then made his way to the house. That's when he allegedly received a chilling photo from Deborah's phone, reportedly showing her lifeless body on the floor. Officers eventually forced their way inside. They found Deborah brutally beaten and stabbed dozens of times. Taylor Meyer was arrested. In an interview with detectives, Meyer allegedly confessed to killing his wife, explaining that their marriage had been strained since he saw a photo of her holding hands with another man in January, referring to the other man as her co-worker. Meyer said he tried to pull out all of the stops on Valentine's Day, allegedly saying during the interview, quote, "It was the hardest I've ever tried. She just didn't give a At some point after dinner, Meyer allegedly said he and his wife fought and she left the house for about 20 minutes to go see her alleged boyfriend. Per the affidavit, Meyer said, "For the last 2 months, I've been staying home with the kids every Saturday night while she goes and f***s whoever and lies to my face about it." Reportedly, while his wife was in the bathroom, Meyer tried to read her text messages on her smartwatch, and when she came back out, he demanded her cell phone. She allegedly refused, and a physical confrontation began. Meyer claimed that during the struggle, Deborah allegedly said, quote, "What are you going to do? Kill me? You're going to hurt me and leave our kids with no parents?" The altercation reportedly turned violent. Meyer allegedly choked Deborah and went through her phone, later placing a call to her alleged boyfriend and reportedly told him, "It's your fault. You want to ruin my marriage and tear my family apart." All while his wife was allegedly screaming in the background. Court documents say Meyer went back to choking his wife and then allegedly hit her in the head several times with a wine bottle until she was unconscious. Meyer allegedly claimed he wasn't sure if Deborah was dead, but he went to the kitchen and grabbed a, quote, "big kitchen knife," a long one, which he reportedly used to stab her in the chest. Police say Meyer then sent a photo of his wife's body to her alleged boyfriend, which he captioned, "Your fault." A medical examiner determined Deborah had been stabbed about 40 times. Meyer is currently being held in the Clark County Detention Center without bond. Joining me to talk more about this is legal expert Brad Banks. Brad, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
So, given the details in the probable cause affidavit, what challenges do you think the defense might face in this case?
I mean, it's going to be a tough case for them because the defendant kind of spilled his guts as to what was going on and why he did what he did. And so, it's going to be a challenge. This is going to be one of those where they're probably looking, are there lesser charges or what can we do to mitigate the circumstances here?
If you were on his defense team, what would be your strategy?
If I was looking at it from this case, Indiana has what's called voluntary manslaughter, and voluntary manslaughter is where you do a killing in the heat of the moment. Or it actually says you have to have the heat of passion, and that would probably be my strategy here. Would be to try to get the prosecutor to negotiate something along with voluntary manslaughter as opposed to a murder charge.
With the photo of the victim's body allegedly sent from Taylor Meyer's phone, how impactful could that be in court?
Well, obviously the photo, he's just he's sort of documenting the crime for them, and so I mean that's a huge negative. The comments he makes to the police afterwards, and the statement he gives is a huge negative for him, and so that I mean he's many ways he helped build the case for the state.
Meyer allegedly didn't answer the door when police first arrived. Could his actions before the arrest be used against him in court as well?
Yeah, so there's something called consciousness of guilt. So if you do things like run from the police or you um, anything you do or you hide evidence, anything along those lines, that's called consciousness of guilt. And when you wait and don't respond to the police initially, they can argue that oh, he's only doing that because he knew he did something wrong.
Now, the alleged motive revolves around Deborah not appreciating the Valentine's Day plans. How does intent factor into a case like this?
Yeah, I mean in Indiana, you just have to show knowingly or intentionally. There's not a an extra component where if you had a pre-planned meditation or something like that, you get a worse penalty. So the intent is important in any case where there's a murder because if you can show the why, right, then the jury can relate to the situation and it ties him more to the crime. And here, obviously, he's upset about the fact that she's not appreciating his gestures on Valentine's very well. But also, there's this belief that she's cheating on him too, and that comes into play too in his motive. I'd say both of those combined are going to be obviously this is the why. Here's the why, but that's also going to be the part that the jury or the defense will jump in and say, but that's why we have a voluntary here instead of a murder.
Could the defense argue that this was a crime of passion rather than premeditated murder? And what's the difference in sentencing?
Yeah, so Indiana doesn't have a premeditated murder statute; just has murder. If it is premeditated, that's something that could make the sentencing worse. In Indiana, the voluntary manslaughter is the crime of passion, where the murder is done in passion. That drastically reduces the possible penalties. It's actually a fully suspendable sentence. So, in theory, at least, a judge could give you no executed time. You could get up to 30 years on that. But murder, you're going to look at getting in the 50, 55-year range. And you can get something, the max you could get on a voluntary would be 30. So it'd be a pretty drastic drop to go from a murder to a voluntary.
Does it I'm trying to figure out a way of how to phrase this, but does it work against him that his children were upstairs when this alleged crime took place?
Yeah, so Indiana has statutory aggravators and mitigators that come into play, and the facts of the crime are can be something that is an aggravator, and so the presence of his children would certainly be something the prosecutor would argue as an aggravator and something the judge should use to increase that sentence.
What role do digital records like phone calls, messages, and the photo sent to her alleged lover play in a modern murder trial?
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to know. So to combat the voluntary manslaughter argument that the defense is going to make in this, because that's what they're going to focus on is he's finding out that she's cheating on him and he's got overwhelmed with emotion and then she gets this disappointment on Valentine's Day and he just snaps and reacts. The flip side of that I think the prosecutor will put out there is it sounds like perhaps he knew there was something going on for some period of time or had suspicion that she was cheating on him for some period of time. He's demanding her phone. So there's obviously something where he had some belief that but more and more time where he believed he was being cheated on starts undermining that he was acting in sudden passion, right? That this is something he's had boiling over for a longer period of time. And he had a chance to try to calm down and cool down over it. And then, the prosecutor would say, well, that's murder, not voluntary manslaughter. This wasn't a snap thing. This is something he'd known for weeks. And, he decided this was the moment to follow through on it. So if they have a long history of showing that he knew about this relationship or suspected about that relationship, that could hurt his argument for voluntary manslaughter.
And if the defense argues self-defense or a temporary loss of control, what kind of evidence would they need to support that?
Yeah, the more they can show this was one of those instances where he found out information that was kind of overwhelming to him and he snapped, the better. So it sounds like he got into her phone. Did he see things in her phone? Something, even if he knew about this relationship or had suspect about this relationship, but he sees something where, let's say the guy sent some, nude pictures of himself, or she had sent some, whatever it might be, that would have really inflamed his passion. That's the kind of evidence the defense is going to latch on to try to make that voluntary argument. And so Indiana also has guilty but mentally ill. If there was some mental health issues going on that were combined in this, which certainly his acts indicate could be, that's another avenue they may look at too, is a guilty but mentally ill type route.
Now, police reportedly forced entry into the home. Could there be any legal challenges regarding how the search and arrest were conducted?
In my read of it, likely not. One of the exceptions to the need for a search warrant is exigent circumstances. And in this case, they had reason to believe that there was somebody whose life may be in jeopardy or threat of life was at play. And when they have that, they don't have to wait for a search warrant. So I think they're probably going to have a pretty good exigent circumstances argument here.
Now, we touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but would Deborah's alleged affair, if proven, be relevant in court, or would it be considered a distraction from the actual alleged crime?
Yeah, the fact that she's having an affair in of itself, I would say, is not relevant unless he's finding out about it in that very close proximity to the murder itself. Then it becomes relevant only to the extent that it would explain potentially that voluntary manslaughter argument. Outside of that, if this was something he did know about for weeks and weeks and weeks, well, you can argue about the morality of being faithful to your spouse. Cheating in of itself is not a crime, so it wouldn't be relevant other than to show this may be why he did it, and then so it could be motive, but then also for the defense, it could be an argument for the voluntary manslaughter.
And a lot of people have been talking about this case. How does a high-profile case like this one, with graphic details and media coverage, impact jury selection in trial proceedings?
Yeah, so obviously, anytime you have a case like this where it's getting a lot of media attention, you have to take very particular care with that in jury selection, because when you're selecting the jury, you really have to make sure they don't know or have any preconceived ideas about this case. So you really have to drill down a lot on the media coverage. Did you see any coverage in the media? If you did, how did it impact you? Did it bias you one way or another? Ideally, probably from both sides, you would rather have somebody that had no exposure to it. And that's just an additional thing you're going to have to query the jury about in voir dire.
Great. Well, this is definitely something that we will be following closely. Thank you so much, Brad, for joining me today.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
We've covered the legal side, but cases like this also raise important conversations about domestic violence. Joining me now to provide insight is DV expert Brett Ward. Brett, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. Police say that Taylor Meyer planned an elaborate Valentine's Day surprise, but when his wife didn't react as he expected, the night allegedly turned violent. In your experience, how common is it for control or rejection to trigger domestic violence?
Well, control and rejection are two sides of the same coin. Control is the main aspect of domestic violence, where I like to use the term dominance, where a perpetrator of the violence wants to be the dominant voice, the dominant force in the family. And when they face rejection, when the victim stands up for themselves, whether verbally or physically pushes back against the physical violence, it often, when things take a very, very dangerous turn, like they did here.
And authorities claim that Meyer sent a graphic photo of his wife's body to her alleged lover. From a psychological standpoint, what does that say about the mindset of an alleged abuser?
Well, I'm not a psychologist. I have seen cases like this, and what I can tell you is that it shows me that he wasn't thinking rationally, that he was in a heightened emotional state towards the end of psychosis potentially, and whether it was an exacerbation of mental illness or some sort of snap where it went to psychosis. This person wasn't thinking about himself, wasn't thinking rationally, wasn't thinking about how he was going to get away with a crime. What he was thinking about at that moment is how he could assert his dominance. Not only did he punish the victim, but he wanted to show the person who he believes had led the victim astray, what he could do in that moment and what happens when you mess with someone like him.
And according to the affidavit, the suspect allegedly said things like, "Oh, I'm stronger than you." Just saying things like that. What does that mean to you as a domestic violence expert?
So it's very interesting. There's two like areas of thought for domestic violence. One is it kind of what we call specific to the situation, or one is generalized. The generalized is, well, there's violent people and they'll be violent with their family, like the same way they'd be violent in a bar fight, the same way they'd be violent throughout their lives. What the domestic violence specified arena is that no, these aren't violent people. This is someone who needs to assert dominance and control, like we talked about before. And that's what we're seeing here. Okay, we're seeing someone who was showing control, that this wasn't likely a violent person. This was someone who, in this scenario, was going to show his wife that she should be doing things his way, that she's a fool for straying, and that, she should fall in line because he did this one gesture. I'm sure it was probably the first nice gesture in years of neglect, and that she should fall in line. And that's what it says to me, that it really confirms we're talking about the very typical control dominance cycle that we have with domestic violence.
Now, this attack allegedly happened while the couple's 3 children were upstairs. How does domestic violence impact kids, even if they don't directly witness the abuse?
Well, this is the most extreme example, because now you have children that basically are not going to have any parents. They lost their mother, and they're going to likely lose their father to the criminal justice system. So that impact is clear, that they are going to be raised by someone who isn't their parents, and they're going to know eventually, because this is out in the news. When they Google their names, they're going to know that this happened, and probably someone's going to speak to them about it sooner than that. And that can have a devastating emotional impact on them. But let's assume, just in the generalized arena, when you have children who are witnessing domestic violence, it absolutely has an emotional impact on them as they grow up. But there's another impact that they have. Children at this age, they're sponges. They're learning from observing. How many times does someone say, oh, they get their sense of humor from their mom, or, oh, they get their quick wit from their dad? Well, children learn from their parents. That's the normal environment that they, mock and take on. So if children are witnessing domestic violence, you're going to have, unfortunately, the same gender as the perpetrator. They may see that that's how you deal in your interpersonal relationships, in your romantic relationships. And when someone of the same gender as the victim, they may think that that's normal. And if someone treats them that way, that it's okay, because that's what they have witnessed. So it has a tremendous negative impact on children.
Do you recommend that those children, get help, that they, get therapy?
Absolutely. These children specifically are going to need lifetime therapy. To work this out. This is one of the most, unfair things that could happen. But in general, yes, children who witness abuse should have therapy, and they also should need to be in an environment where they're not witnessing this, where this isn't the normal of their lives. People can change. Kids can see that things should be different. And I'm hoping in whatever environment these 3 children go into, it's one where these issues do not exist.
Investigators say a person that called 911 heard Deborah Meyer screaming for help. In situations like this, how crucial is it for bystanders or loved ones to take action?
So in situations like this, in the moment, it's crucial. It's crucial because things like this escalate, like we see here. One of the things that, when you look at this scenario and you look into studies regarding domestic violence, things usually turn into a domestic homicide, from domestic violence to a domestic homicide. One of the main factors is that, as I said earlier, the person fights back or talks back, because what they're showing the other person is your efforts to control me aren't working. So they take it to another level. When that is happening, it is imperative that people get help right away. and intervene if possible. And even before that, it's important for people when they see these things, these patterns, when they see someone who is very, happy and friendly and had, many different contacts, only be focused on their relationship with their spouse, and that those friends are cut off, when family members are feeling cut off from someone who they had a warm, wonderful relationship with when they're with a new boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever. People should start to talk about it, start to look into it, because the person in the relationship sometimes either can't see it or doesn't want to see it, or does their own form of safety planning, which is, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and I'll avoid the beating, or I'll avoid the scolding, or I'll avoid the financial consequences of me speaking up. So it's really important for people around the victim to rally around them and help them get out of the situation.
This case has gained national attention. In your experience, does media coverage help or hurt efforts to prevent domestic violence?
In my opinion, it helps. And the reason it helps is because and again, just like I said, it's usually not going to reach the victims. The victims will always say, well, that's not me. I'm not in that bad of a situation. But it will educate the people around the victim. When you have, especially things like this where it's a homicide, I'm sure people who read this article and said, geez, you know what? My niece is in a situation like that, or my daughter's in a situation like that, or my cousin's in a situation like that, and I need to act before this happens to her. That's why I think this media coverage is very important, because it tells people you can't just sit idly by and hope it gets better, because it almost never does.
And many assume domestic violence follows a pattern before escalating, but can an alleged attack like this happen without prior physical abuse?
Certainly it can. And I think from what I've read about this and heard about this situation, there really weren't reports of prior physical abuse. And in this scenario, other than the struggle for the phone, which was totally unacceptable, but I think something that is more common, and what we wouldn't say is really within what we think about as physical abuse, although it is. But this really escalated from what I'm reading when she said, what are you going to do to me? Are you going to hurt me with no one take care of our children? And after he made this grand gesture, she left the house for 20 minutes. So when he thought he had her right where he wanted her, that he was going to bring Paris to her and she was going to re-fall in love with him, and instead she went outside, and whether she did or not, was in contact or seeing the person who she was having an affair with, that triggered something in him, that this situation was out of control. And I believe that's what led to the extreme escalation here. Now, if we find out that he actually had been physically abusive in the past, would I be surprised? Not at all. But certainly it can be that one time that it escalates, where it escalates far too far, which had happened here.
Right. And I think we mentioned this before, from what we know, there were no immediate reports of past violence in this relationship. And I think you kind of touched on this already, but does that mean that there were no warning signs, or can abuse take different forms before turning deadly?
For sure. It definitely does. And it's a very good question. And the fact is that it can be as minor as, again, someone who cuts off the friendships that the person has, someone who cuts off the family ties, someone who repeatedly speaks badly about the other person's family, someone who repeatedly puts down their friends, who tries to, whenever their spouse tries to make a plans with friends, says, I don't want to go, and here's the reason, they this, they that. That is an early warning sign of someone who's trying to make that person rely solely on them for their emotional well-being, for their physical well-being, for their financial well-being. And then that helps you maintain control. So to me, that is a very big early warning sign. All right. Other early warning signs: criticism about the other person's appearance. You're gaining weight, or, you're so stupid and you don't read and you need to be more educated. What that person is saying is, I need you to realize I'm the dominant one. I'm the smart one. I'm the good looking one. I'm the one who's going to provide you with this good life. And without me, you'll be nothing. Those are really huge early warning signs that may seem like, well, he's a jerk, but really are a sign of really more severe things in that relationship.
Right. And I guess this is why it's so important for people to realize that these are red flags and to take them as serious as they can. And in cases where control or jealousy is a factor, how dangerous can a breakup or rejection be for someone trying to leave a volatile relationship?
Well, the control and jealousy are two different things, although again, the jealousy can bring out the worst in control. And that's what happened. And again, jealousy to me is not as big of a problem unless it's a form of a attack on dominance, because that attack on dominance is where the real danger comes in. But with respect to control, it is a very scary piece of it. And someone should have support systems in place before they do it, because people will often say, like, I can't believe she didn't leave him earlier, or he didn't leave him earlier, or whatever the situation is. And the response is that person has been psychologically damaged, usually for months, if not years. And it's not just easy to break away from that. And that person really is effective in saying, a lot of the situations where people have kids, the abuser will say, I'm going to get custody of the kids. I'm going to tell them you're crazy. And we'll start talking about this concept of gaslighting that we're hearing more and more about. And we'll say, you're the abusive one, and you will have no money. I'll have plenty of money. And so that person stays in the relationship and gets scared of those things. And people just think, well, once he treats you bad, you'll leave. No, that person is fearful of all those threats that were made. Their psychology is that they're supposed to put up with it. And some of them fear so much that their kids will ever be alone with this batterer that they'd rather take the abuse than ever be in a situation where that person is alone with their children, which is a very common result of a split or a divorce.
What resources are available for people who feel trapped in an abusive relationship but are afraid to leave?
There is a domestic violence hotline. You just Google it. There are resources in every jurisdiction I know of, domestic violence organizations who have dealt with these issues at every level of severity. They are private, they are confidential. Just make that first call. If you're one of those people who says, this could be me, even if you think it's 99% chance it isn't, make that phone call. The other person should never find out. Those people are not going to force you to do anything, but at least they could give you resources to help you. Many of them have legal resources available to people. They have counseling resources available to people. And if you don't want to take that step, if you have a mental health professional, speak to them about it. Be honest with them about what's happening. Those relationships in every jurisdiction I know about are completely confidential. And if you don't have access or resources for one of them, tell a friend, okay? Tell a family member about those things.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm hoping that our conversation has helped at least one person today. Thank you again.
I agree, and thank you for having me.
Deborah Meyer has pleaded not guilty to the murder charge and is scheduled to appear in court on March 18th. For Law and Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker.